Hello everybody, I'm Carl Spring. Dan is off tonight and Happy New Year's Eve. Well, 2026 could be a very different year for Democrats running Minnesota. The Trump administration is coming down hard following allegations of a billion-dollar fraud scandal involving taxpayer funds. The latest moves, expanding investigations and freezing federal child care payments. Fox News correspondent Garrett Tenney has more.
When we bring him in, believe me, those are going to be very tough questions that Governor Walz himself will be asked.
Congressional investigators are looking for answers over alleged fraud schemes in Minnesota. The House Oversight Committee is inviting Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison and Governor Tim Walz to testify at a public hearing in February. Walz's office tells Fox News, "We're always happy to work with Congress, though this committee has a track record of holding circus hearings that have nothing to do with the issue at hand." The Trump administration not holding back.
Governor Walz is completely incompetent. He always has been, and President Trump has long called him out.
A week from today, the committee will also hear from a group of Minnesota Republican lawmakers from the state's House Committee on Fraud who've been sounding the alarm for months.
There are so many vectors of fraud where this same pattern keeps playing out. So I think we have a long way to go to stop the fraud in Minnesota.
As all of the investigations into Minnesota continue, the Trump administration is taking steps to cut off federal funding for programs where fraud has allegedly run rampant. $185 million for the state's child care programs from the Department of Health and Human Services is now frozen, along with $5.5 million in grants from the Small Business Administration.
I spoke directly with the director of the Minnesota Child Care Services office. She could not tell me with confidence whether those allegations of fraud are isolated or whether there's fraud stretching statewide.
Minnesota's Somali community says the national spotlight is bringing unwarranted attacks, as Minneapolis police are investigating a reported break-in and burglary at a daycare center that allegedly had important documentation on enrollment stolen.
One video made by a specific individual made this all happen. Yesterday was our daycare. Tomorrow might be someone else's. We don't know. So this has to stop.
That particular daycare center was not featured in Nick Shirley's viral video, but it is one of the dozens flagged to state investigators earlier this year for receiving more than $1 million in federal funding, despite having multiple repeated violations on record. In Chicago, I'm Garrett Tenney, Fox News.
A spokesperson for U.S. Health and Human Services said today there's actually not a freeze necessarily on the money coming to Minnesota, just much tighter scrutiny before funds will be released. Callie Thomas, the executive director of Happy Time Daycare in Duluth, says these changes could be detrimental to daycares. Happy Time is a nonprofit with tuition only covering bills and staff. Thomas says there are parents who rely on federal funding to help cover the cost of tuition through Minnesota's Child Care Assistance Program, also known as CCAP, meaning some children might be unenrolled, forcing some daycares to close.
There's going to be a significant drop in enrollment and jobs. People aren't going to be able to work. And then we're going completely backwards. And I don't know when this is going to start and when everyone's going to see the change, but I think as soon as they freeze it, everyone that has CCAP families are going to lose them in a blink of an eye.
Thomas also says daycare owners are in the dark about the freeze or extra reporting, causing uncertainty for daycares and families.
I've gotten no information. I've been checking my emails throughout the day constantly to see if we'd get something. I know the St. Louis County hasn't heard anything quite yet about it, so I have no clue when this is going to start.
The Happy Time Daycare Center is the longest running daycare in Duluth. It's not just daycares affected. On Christmas Eve, Heartland PCA, a home care agency in northern Minnesota, received notice from the Department of Human Services that payments were being suspended under a new federal Medicaid prepayment review process. Heartland PCA says their agency, along with 600 others, was impacted yesterday by an abrupt halt in payments tied to fraud concerns involving 14 federally funded services. Heartland PCA provides in-home care for seniors and people with disabilities, including personal care, homemaker support, and community-based services. With payments suspended, agencies across the state could be facing 30 to 90 days without funding. This puts staff, payroll, and essential care for hundreds of vulnerable clients at risk.
I think for the home care agencies to stop payment and expect them to cover payrolls for a month is really hard. So it puts the companies struggling financially, and it's very scary.
Heartland PCA says it will borrow funds to pay employees, but many smaller agencies cannot do that, creating the risk of suspended services, causing even more problems.
The main thing that we want to draw attention to is that it's really going to affect our vulnerable populations here in Minnesota, and that meaning our elderly populations and people who are not able to care for themselves. So that's really where we're worried, is how is that going to negatively impact them.
The agency urges people to check on neighbors and reach out to local and state representatives, which they have already done.